Motion sensors are one of the most important device types that you'll own in a smart home, and especially if you have a Samsung SmartThings hub. And right now, because the Samsung SmartThings motion sensors themselves are not being sold, there's a real gap in the market. Plus, there are some pretty big differences that we uncovered through our testing of these different motion sensors, and we have everything from a $10 Ikea sensor to a $60 Aeotec sensor and everything in between. Hello Automators, thanks for tuning in again. I'm Brian from Automate Your Life, and today one of the most frustrating things in the smart home market is not knowing whether a motion sensor or any sensor really will work with your Samsung SmartThings hub. And this can be a hard thing to uncover. So as we go through the different reviews of these different motion sensors, what we're also going to do is tell you exactly where in your home we think these are best suited. Now I'm going to start with the V3 Samsung SmartThings Motion Sensor. We'll talk about the specifications and everything about this device because this is the gold standard by which everything else should be measured by. And there are replacement devices that will use this same design, or as far as we can tell, the exact same design coming from Aeotec very soon here in 2021. So this sensor is $25 US, and it has about a 15 to 20 foot range in terms of reliably sensing motion. Now, on top of that, there's also a field of view measurement that all of these have, and it's 120 degrees out from center. So that's kind of 60 degrees on each side. Now, included in this device is a CR2450 battery that allows you to power it for about a year. Sometimes you'll get a little more, sometimes you'll get a little less. It depends on your use. If you've ever owned one of these, then you know just how easy it is to set it up. It's a couple of taps inside of the SmartThings application and it will pair very seamlessly without any real interaction from you. Then you're ready to go and create those automations, and that's a stark contrast from some of the other devices we have on the table today. The other thing you get is a temperature sensor, and this becomes more and more important as you go through automating your life or really creating that protection you want in your home. And we think about the cases of really cold air getting into your home and running your thermostat for a long period of time. This is something that can protect against that. Now, I personally have had these in really humid and really dusty situations, and they have performed admirably. This is not a specific rating that I'm telling you they have, but they survive really well in situations like the bathroom or in situations like your garage. But what I really like about this sensor, aside from all of these great things, is things like the magnetic spot on the back here that allows you to attach to the wall mount or just to stick it to any surface. And it's also a completely local device. So when it's paired to the Samsung SmartThings hub, well, then it can execute even if the internet isn't available in some situations. Your automations have to be local as well, but this is something that is really important when the internet goes down. One of the most critical components of these motion sensors is how often they can sense motion, or what the cooldown period is. And these are called sleepy end devices, or sleepy Zigbee devices. And what that means is after it senses motion, the device will go to sleep for a time period. And oftentimes this is hard-coded into the device and you can't change that as a user. Now for this, it's about a 20-second sleepy time, or time that this device goes to sleep. So once it detects that first motion, it's going to be able to detect again in 20 seconds. So let's move on to the Ikea Motion Sensor, and you can save over half of the price of this. This is a $10 motion sensor that you can get a ton of from Ikea. It's also a Zigbee motion sensor, but it has a couple of batteries and it's intended to give you a little bit longer battery life, and more on that situation in a bit. But when you go and you read the actual documentation around this device, Ikea tells you that they can sense anywhere from 60 degrees to 120 degrees out from center. Now, what is really funny about that is that's a huge range, and in in my testing, I was getting around that 100 to 120 degree range out from center. That's a hard thing for us to exactly measure, but on top of that, what their documentation says is you're going to get 10 meters out. And no, that's not the range of the Zigbee connection. That's the range of the motion sensor. No, that is not what you're going to get. You're more reliable within about 10 to 13 feet. It's a little bit less than that Samsung SmartThings sensor. Setup was incredibly easy too. You put the batteries in and you're basically ready to go. There's some buttons in there that when pairing with Samsung SmartThings really doesn't matter a lot here, and then you will get a couple of device presses or a couple of taps inside of the application and it pairs. So Ikea has done some good work to create a device handler that works, but this is about where the great experience ends with this sensor. It's cloud connected, and that's really important. When that internet goes out, it's not going to work anymore, unfortunately. And I expect this to be fixed actually in the coming months as Samsung converts lots of the device handlers to a standard type, and then these should actually become locally connected. However, you're not getting any other sensor types on this device. This is purely motion, and as I was doing testing with how fast these devices were responding, which actually this seemed to respond every bit as quick as my locally connected Samsung SmartThings device. But what I was also finding was that I could trigger it, and then in the application, it was sitting there showing that motion was continuing even though I wasn't moving. So I started to measure that cool down period, or how long it was going to sleep for, and actually this device waits a full 3 minutes before it can trigger any sort of automation again. And so especially in a security use case, this is just not going to allow you to trigger those recordings that you want to continually record when someone moves through a space. And I think that might even affect a lot of your lighting applications. It seemed to affect the reliability of my all of my different automations that I was using with this actually occurring. So it's not that the device wasn't reliably connected to SmartThings, it just made me feel like the device wasn't reliable, and I think you'll feel the same way. Let's flip back to something that's a little more expensive, and I was surprised at the performance that I got out of this Philips Hue Motion Sensor when I brought it in to Samsung SmartThings. This sensor's a few years old, and coming in at $40, initially I was pretty much against buying one of these, but it has an IP42 rating, which means you can put it in those more humid and even dusty environments and expect a better performance out of this, and actually I'm pretty sure about that at this point. Plus, it has a temperature sensor on it that does come into Samsung SmartThings and that you can use. Now, on top of that, it's got a 16 feet depth, or it can read you at about 16 feet, and it does so reliably. Now, its field of view is 110 degrees out from center, so that's 55 degrees in each direction, and so that's not quite, all the way out here, but it has been very reliable, and the distance never shortens when you're coming at it from an angle, and that's really important for the reliability of this. Now, when you go to pair this, it's a little bit of a different situation than these other two that have the standard device handlers or native integration. That's not what Philips is doing here. They want you to bring this into their system most of the time, but when you bring it in, it comes up as a thing, and that seems really scary at first, but you go to the IDE and there's a tutorial down below for doing this. You can find that in the links, and you just have to install this device handler, and once you do that, it becomes a Hue Motion Sensor inside of Samsung SmartThings, and it becomes an incredible device. That device handler is written really well for this, and despite it being a cloud connection, which does affect that whole internet thing, it is the fastest in class in terms of its cooldown. This is a 15-second cooldown, so it's ready to re-trigger those motion sensor routines or automations that you have in just 15 seconds. It really improved the speed of automations. Its recognition, I think, is the fastest in the group, and it's a hard thing to tell, but it definitely upgraded a lot of automations that I had running off of this Aeotec sensor, which we'll talk about the speed of that in a bit, but it was so fast and ultra reliable. Now, it also has two AA batteries that we've stuck, or two AAA batteries rather, that we've stuck in this, and you're going to get a couple of years. So what the Philips Hue Motion Sensor becomes, once you've handled that initial setup, is a set and forget device that's just going to work. I'm going to jump to something that's quite a bit different here. Oh, I had to snap that off the table. Now, this is from a company called Linkind, or I think it's Linkind, or maybe it's Linkind. I'm not sure, but this is a relatively unused motion sensor when we talk about Samsung SmartThings. And I wanted to reach out to this company and I asked them to send me some of these because it's $19 when you buy a single one, and it actually goes down in price as you buy more. But being that it's relatively unused, there's really no information on how to connect this into Samsung SmartThings. With them being able to see 16 feet out and measure motion and 110-degree field of view, they're lining up directly with the Philips Hue. That makes it pretty interesting at the price tag. Now, they also have a CR2450 that they're saying you're going to get about 2 years of battery life out of, and that is the same battery as many of these things, and I think you're going to be around a year to a year and a half with this kind of a sensor. But again, the initial pairing experience was not easy, and I did struggle having this actually be found by my Samsung SmartThings hub. Once it was, it became a thing again, and now I have to go and I have to find a device handler, or I have to find the device type. I can choose a device type in Samsung SmartThings. So what I did initially was do a couple of searches, see if anyone had written a device handler. I don't want to write a device handler, so I didn't. But what I did do was just pick one of the very basic ones, and what the Samsung SmartThings sensor uses is called the SmartSense Motion Sensor device type, and that comes with it a device handler. Now, I tried to pick that. I couldn't maintain a connection, it wasn't working right, and I wasn't getting anything back. Now, I went to just a Zigbee Motion Sensor, and I did get connectivity. That's when it took a reboot of the device, I had to take the battery out, and then it did come into SmartThings. This connection method wasn't as reliable as the other sensors that we've talked about so far. I really haven't had real reliability issues with anything that we've talked about. Now, this one became more unreliable, and I struggled to get responses out of this device, but it came from a different place than the device's connectivity. We've talked about this cooldown thing a few times, and because of the device type that I chose, the device was being treated as a 20-second cooldown, but it's really not. It has that 3-minute cooldown, just like the Ikea sensor. So in SmartThings, it looked like the motion was over and it looked like I could trigger this device again, but I'm sitting there like a crazy person waving my hand at it, and it just waits for 3 minutes in order to trigger again. Unfortunately, using the device handler that I am and the type of device that I am, it's cloud connected, plus that 3 minutes, plus the fact that I'm not getting any other sensors, makes this a pretty hard sell for coming into Samsung SmartThings. It is still working, and especially when it's close to the hub, it's working really well, but when I put it through repeaters, it doesn't seem to be managing that very well either. So this is a big struggle, I think, for going and using this in Samsung SmartThings. Something I would avoid right now until we get to more standard device handlers. The amount of people who ask me about this Aqara Motion Sensor is a pretty big number because they want to bring it into Samsung SmartThings. They want this cheap $20 sensor, and there's a lot of great things about it. I mean, rip off the tape there, look at how small this thing is. And it includes an illumination sensor. Plus, this device, or this stand here, can actually twist 360 degrees, and you've got this pretty good field or range of motion here. So you can really orient this in any way. Plus, you add in the fact that it's just a 2450 battery that you need again. And when you look at the documentation, Aqara actually says 22 feet worth of motion detection in terms of distance away and 170 degree field of view. So at first blush, this has amazing capability for everything you need in Samsung SmartThings. But the pairing process was a struggle. Now, I didn't have to be right next to the hub in order to pair things, but this actually taught me something about the device because it went through a repeater, and we'll talk about that situation in a bit. Now, it becomes a cloud-connected device, and it comes in as a thing, so you have to find a device handler for it. Now, a quick cursory search actually found a great little device handler for this that works really well with the device and brings in the illumination and the motion sensing capabilities. Unfortunately, there's some pretty big negatives that we have to talk about here. Now, that pairing process, I told you guys that it was a bit of a struggle and it taught me something. Now, what it taught me was that when this device goes through a repeater, and actually there's a few on the desk here, when they go through a repeater, they don't work right. They don't work reliably, they'll drop. So I brought this back up next to my hub, and suddenly, after I'd redone a connection, it's working great. Now, that is a really big impact to a lot of people. It's going to depend on the type of repeater that you have, and I can't figure out which types work with this thing. And despite it being a cloud connection, it was really quick to respond, and that was great in that situation, but we have a 2-minute cooldown on this device. So with a lowered reliability overall, this one's a bit hard to recommend for most situations. Let's jump to a device that actually I was really impressed with, and this is the Adurosmart Eria Motion Sensor. I've shown you their lighting in the past, and what's really great about a lot of what they do is they're using Zigbee 3.0. These are basic devices, and they're intended to work with other systems like Samsung SmartThings. When I first got the sensor out of the box, I went, boy, this thing is the biggest, it's the bulkiest. I'm not sure if I love this design, but then I started to test it out and I started to read some of the documentation, and they say 26 feet and 120 degree field of view. Now, that's not the widest ever, but that is the best in class distance in the whole set here. And it is reliably working 20 to 25 feet away, and I was pretty impressed with that. Now, despite it being big, you know what? The stand is really good here. You do have some screws that you would have to put into a wall if you want to use that, but it can also just sit on a table or sit on a number of surfaces. So it's really maneuverable, and actually even with those 2 AAA batteries that you put in here, which give you a really good length of time that you're going to be able to just set and forget this thing, well, it's still pretty light and it's going to sit anywhere just fine. Now, on top of that, what I really loved about this was the setup process and then how it worked. See, it is the exact same setup process. You're just tapping a couple of times. You're choosing Adurosmart Eria as the motion sensor type inside of SmartThings. But once you do that, it sets up locally, and it's using the same device handler as this device right here. So they built this in a really, really smart way, and it shows in terms of reliability. There are a couple of drawbacks here. Now, despite it using that same device handler, I'm not getting a temperature readout from this device. And the other thing is maybe more in line with just the flash that you get out of this. It's one of the more brighter responses that motion has been detected. The next sensor is $60. So we're not messing around here. This is the Aeotec Multisensor 6. I've shown it on the channel a few times, and it's actually the only Z-Wave sensor that we're going to review. Everything else here is Zigbee. Now, there's a couple of reasons I'm reviewing this, and the first is so that all of Paul's followers don't sit there and go, ooh, the Zigbee in the comments, but you know, I think I'm gonna get that anyways. Now, the motion sensor is really basically the same as the others. 16.4 feet, 120 degrees out, and you know what? It is a 20 to 25 second cooldown. It actually comes right in line with the Samsung SmartThings version here. But the Aeotec is called a multi-sensor for a reason, and you're able to really customize your automations as a result of this. You're getting temperature, humidity, illumination, a tamper, or basically if it gets moved, you can know, and UV levels. So with all of those different sensors, you'd probably be pretty concerned about battery life, but they're putting two CR123A batteries in here, and you're solidly getting a couple of years out of this. And the other thing is, this is the only wired device. So you can actually, instead of those batteries, wire in this sensor, and that becomes such a great option for so many of you. And on top of that, within Samsung SmartThings, this becomes one of the only sensors that you can really adjust the motion sensing range and the reporting interval for all those other sensors. You know, you don't necessarily need the UV lighting level every 8 minutes, but you can select that, and you can go all the way into hours if you'd like. That will save on battery life, but I have put the most aggressive settings on this, and I'm still getting that 1.5 to 2 year battery performance out of this with pretty heavy use. Now, it's a locally connected device that the setup on was incredibly easy way back when, and now it's even easier. You're just basically selecting that you have an Aeotec Multisensor, and it does the rest for you. The pairing is simple, and because it's Z-Wave, you can be quite far away during that pairing process. But the thing that starts to get me about this sensor is it takes much longer, and it's a noticeable, probably a second delay in terms of motion sensing and then triggering your automations. Despite it being that local device, it's definitely taking longer than everything else on the table. So with all those other sensors, this becomes something that you can use in a lot of different scenarios. It's so customizable what you can do with your decision making, and I've done really, really complex things with this device. So I love it in a lot of cases, but you have to be aware of that delay in motion before you go and spend the whole $60. Whenever I say the name of this company, it just makes me feel like I want to swear, and it's not just Sonoff, it's Sonoffa or something like that. Anyways, we got a motion sensor from them, and they had recently created a whole set of Zigbee sensors or Zigbee devices for use with their own hub, but I mean, we're talking about Samsung SmartThings here, people. So with it being $18 and having that 20-foot range and 110-degree field of view, I mean, I thought less about swearing, I'll tell you that much, as I picked up this device. But this is another device that comes in as a thing, and it doesn't seem to matter what device type I pick, even though I even chose the humidity and temperature motion sensor inside of Samsung SmartThings. I can't get the temperature and humidity to come in. Plus, it's not reliable when it's going through those other repeater devices, and it's cloud connected. So this went downhill really quickly when it was kind of out of the range of the actual hub. But as a motion sensor within the range of the hub, this worked incredibly well. So again, it's kind of like the Aqara. It's even like the Linkind here. They really work well when you're close to the hub, but they're not working well out and about and around my home for me, and they're not working when the internet goes down at all. As I said earlier, I want to go through a number of the different situations here and give you the right motion sensor for the situation that you're maybe looking at. But the first thing off the top that I want you to really have pulled in from this video is that it's a little bit of you get what you pay for here. And it's not so much that you can just go out and buy a $10 sensor and expect it to work everywhere. It's not how these things are designed. These companies are balancing things like battery life versus how often they report or how much they go to sleep. And that's also balanced with the different sensors that you're getting on these, and on top of that, just the reliability overall. And basically, as you go up in price here, the devices got more and more reliable. Let's talk about the bathroom situation. This is one that I find really useful, and the first thing I want to point out is the Philips Hue has an IP42 rating, and I also know from experience that the Samsung SmartThings version works really well in bathrooms. It doesn't seem to get gummed up by that humidity, or at least not quick enough for me to have noticed. Same thing with the Aeotec sensor. Those devices have great sealed compartments here. Now, actually, the Ikea has an IP44 rating, which means it's splash resistant. The other thing that I really like about Samsung and Philips Hue is that they're magnetic, and this means that you can hang them on fixtures and many magnetic surfaces that you'll have in the bathroom. When you move into the bedroom, lots of these devices flicker, and they kind of show that they have noticed motion, and this Eria one really shows it. You'll see point light, you'll see this flicker, the Sonoff, and even the Philips does sometimes. It doesn't all the time. I'm not totally sure what's going on there, but the other devices are really muted, or you won't see them in a bedroom space. And the best still for the bedroom space for me is the Samsung version, and when we get those new Aeotec devices, I'm going to assume that that's perfect. When we move into the kitchen, well, you probably need some more distance and you need a bigger range. Now, the best sensor for that, honestly, the Eria has been absolutely amazing. You can set it up on the top of a counter or your cupboards up at the top, and you can have it pointed down a little bit into your room, and it's going to cover a pretty huge space. Now, that on top of its ability to report locally makes it a great option. But you also have a number of metallic or magnetic surfaces, and so the Philips Hue and the Samsung SmartThings become really great sensors, and this is something I like to do. I stick this sensor actually right next to my oven, and that means I can measure how hot it's getting around that oven, and I can get notices if it's been too hot for too long. And with the magnetic backing, I don't need anything else, and it just sits there. In the living room, you're probably wanting to cover a larger area, and again, the Eria does great with that. But you also, if you're kind of thinking about behind a TV or around a TV, those kinds of areas usually have a lot of Wi-Fi devices, and Zigbee can run into problems. So the Aeotec is actually a really great option around a TV for getting all the signals out that you will need. Now, you're going to have that delay, so maybe you want to use it in conjunction with something else for motion sensing in the living room. And again, I don't think you can go wrong with the Eria, the SmartThings, or the Philips Hue device. The one thing I'll say is if you're near your SmartThings hub, then I even think that the Aqara could work really well here with its really wide angle view here. That becomes a really interesting device that maybe you can go and use in this situation. If you need a motion sensor in a furnace room or out far away from your hub, now you can use repeaters, but there's only certain ones here on the desk that worked really well for me, and you're going to hear this again and again, and I said you're paying for reliability here, but the Eria, the Philips, or the Samsung SmartThings, and the Philips Hue all worked pretty well with repeaters in the mix. I didn't run into any issues there, but the Aeotec can sit in a furnace room. There's so many reflective materials, and there's so many opportunities for a higher frequency thing like Zigbee at 2.4 gigahertz here in North America. It can be hard to get that signal out of a furnace room. And so again, the Aeotec really makes a lot of sense, and it can also make a lot of sense out in a garage space. Now, I have personally put the Samsung SmartThings motion sensors out in a garage. What I'll tell you is if you have big windows in your garage, you're gonna get some issues when they're kind of pointed in that direction. So you have to think about placement, but I have successfully put both of these sensors in the garage. Now, Philips Hue makes an outdoor motion sensor that is directly suited for that kind of an application. It's not in this review, but I would expect you could use one of those really well. Now, one of the things that pairs really well with motion sensors are lights, and that's what a lot of us do here. And I actually reviewed 5 light bulbs that need a little bit of help. They need to be paired with devices like this to work really well. So go check out that video. Otherwise, thanks for watching today, and of course, don't hate, automate.